now let me introduce Gary Rowe, TechVision CEO and Principal Consulting Analyst, to kick off the discussion.
Great. Thanks, everyone. This has been a long time coming. Kevin Campman and I had discussions probably a year and a half ago about IGA, about some of the challenges. We continue to, a lot of the kind of challenges continue to be reinforced as we're doing consulting engagements and working with our research clients. We continue to, hear about more and more challenges. So one of the things we want to do here is to highlight a lot of the challenges and issues we see, but more importantly, talk through a path forward. And so what we want to cover today, the overall agenda, I must say that we have, in my opinion, the top couple of people in the world to address this. We have Kevin Campman, who I've had the opportunity to work with for the better part of 25, 30 years. Doug Simmons, who I've worked with an equivalent period of time. Kevin has covered this topic at Burton Group, at Gartner, drove a lot of the magic quadrants in this area, and now we're fortunate enough to have his insight at TechVision. Doug ran consulting for Burton Group, ran consulting, global consulting for identity and security at Gartner. He wears two hats at TechVision, both runs our consulting organization and is also an analyst in this space and has done research reports for us in the area of IGA. So, we have an incredible team. I've been doing this a long time as well, focused on identity governance, was president of Burton Group, co-president of GTP at Gartner, and founded TechVision 10 years ago on Monday of this week. I don't know if any of you saw the post on LinkedIn, but thanks for all of the congrats. I guess survival is real important in this space. And so we've been doing this a long time, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it. But what we want to cover is really two parts. The historical, how did we get here? And you may or may not agree with some of our core premises, but why do we think there have been major challenges? Why do we think there's major room for improvement? And then secondly, what is that path forward? And how do you address that? We can do all kinds of work and have, with literally hundreds, if not thousands over the years, of large enterprises trying to figure these things out. So we're happy to work with you in these areas. And we'll walk through kind of an approach leveraging a reference architecture, next steps, and we absolutely encourage questions. As Gary said, we'll take put the questions in chat at any point, but we'll address them at the end. So I think most of you that are here probably know TechVision, but we look to combine, frankly, the top analysts and consultants in the industry. I think having these two parts work together to have the pure analytical skills, industry skills, visionary skills, along with the on-the-ground consulting is extremely powerful. And that's how we come up with a lot of our recommendations and insights and so forth. We don't cover everything. We look at these inflection points. We look at, identity management and cybersecurity and privacy and where technology and AI and these things are going, both from the consulting side and the research side. And I'm not going to talk much about what we do because we want to really dive into the topics. To give you a flavor for what's interesting to us now, though, and I say that we're doing research reports on this area, but we also do consulting, workshops, and so forth in all of these areas. And this is just what's resonating now. Topics like, know your worker, agentic AI, IoT ecosystems, how do we scale these systems? Kevin's report on IGA, that's kind of the basis for a lot of the discussion we'll have today. and a lot more kind of proactive. Where's identity going? Where's authorization going? Mike DeSabato is doing a report on mobile governance, a lot in AI, and we'll touch on that. So I do want to give you a quick level set on the webinar itself, because if you've attended, you know, our TechVision Chrysalis conference or other things, we'll have kind of formal presentations and so forth. We want this to be a lot more collaborative. And so we're going to have discussions about these points. And it's funny, Kevin, Doug, Gary, myself, and a couple of others, having a couple of analyst meetings, we thought, you know, this is just such a great discussion. We're coming up with so many good ideas. We should record this and try to get this out there. And, you know, to a certain extent, although we've done a little bit more prep here, that's what we're looking to do here. We're trying to leverage, you know, a lot of this expertise. We want to discuss it, and we want to think about, and we'll start using this term IGA 2.0. We want to think about where IGA should go, where governance should go, as we move forward. And we're going to do a lot of these. I do believe, and it's a core mission of TechVision. You know, hopefully you guys will bring us in for consulting and research and other things, but we honestly do want to have a positive impact on the industry and on large enterprises. So we're going to continue to articulate our thinking. Hopefully it's helpful. So, and this is where I'll talk a lot less, and Kevin and Doug will talk a lot more, which will be a blessing to a lot of you. But at this point, you know, let's start with the past. You know, we've made some bold claims. You know, we've basically, you know, highlighted that you know, IGA hasn't worked for a lot of organizations. And I can tell you, even personally, there's probably 10 large companies I've talked with, and you hear these types of scenarios. You know, it's been, you know, we spent, you know, tens of millions of dollars. We have a team of people. You know, we've worked on it the last 3-4 years, and we have 10% of our application bases covered. And I don't know if that resembles some of the folks on this call or not, but you know, I think we can do better. We can do better in IGA. We can do better in IAM, and we have a lot of ideas as in terms of why. So maybe Kevin, if we could start with you, since you know you drove this report. You know, historically, why has IGA failed, and kind of how do we get to this point? How do we let this happen?
It's interesting. Thank you, Gary. That IGA as a domain or discipline evolved over time since I started in this business 40 years ago. We had different ways of managing systems and managing access, and we went from green screens to PCs, client server, all these cloud, all these different ways to allow people to get access to resources in an organization, and the need for access really drove the need to control it. Why did they have to have it? Who has access? Who granted that? When should we take it away? It's really, it really started out as a life cycle approach. But what happened is somewhere in the middle, people started changing the requirements, right? Not only did you need to give people access and get their accounts set up and so forth so they could do work, but the auditors stepped in and said, why did that happen? Is that the right thing? Who made that decision? And it changed the whole focus of this from a workflow process to a reporting process. And there are, the highway is littered with companies who had to change in the middle of that. Some survived and some didn't. And it's very interesting to understand how not only did the customer expectations change, the technology changed, the product vendors changed, and they were all trying to keep up with this changing notion of what identity governance really is. And we started out with this as a technical problem. It arose from systems administrators trying to keep track of the accesses that they granted, who's requesting it, and so forth. It wasn't this notion that was driven from the top of the organization that we need to control this. This is part of our overall product offering. It's not necessarily coupled to business processes and so forth. So there was this disconnect between the business and the technologists from the outset that we've been trying to blend ever since. We also came at this with this notion that really started in the late 19th century with Taylor around organizations being hierarchically structured. So we had a questionable architecture model from the outset because organizations really don't follow that. And that's been a failing of this all along. Everything we have done in this space has been done based on that model. So we have privileges and inheritance and all these kinds of things that they're hard to manage, they're hard to keep control of, and they don't follow the pattern. They're more like a network, or we can talk matrix, but it's more like a network of relationships. And in fact, organizations are organisms. That's the best way to think about them. And they have different parts of the organization that accomplish different things at different times. And it's really a subset of the organization. It's its own environment within the organization. And we have yet to really adopt or cover that. But we really need to change some of the thinking because every organization is different. They don't follow the patterns the way we would like them to, but the vendors had to sell something. And hierarchies were pretty good to cover some things until you started dealing with all the exceptions. And that was when we used to call provisioning exception management, because there were so many reasons why you couldn't do things the way that we thought you should. So that's kind of a joke back in the day that we have more things that don't fit than things that do. And organizations built a lot of custom code around that, as did the vendors, to blend those characteristics into the products. So this was still a work in progress, and still is a work in progress for many organizations. And we started to think about the data. From the day one, data quality was a problem. We had this idea that we set out that we could take that HR data or that information from the manager or a user request and treat that as solid gold, as authoritative data. And then we started to find out, as you started to link this across applications, there was no such thing. And so discipline became very important. We don't have that discipline yet. So we need to start thinking about the data as it is, not the way we would like it to be. This is going to make it more of a dynamic product. It's going to require more intelligence to understand the information that you have. And even if we were trying to look for authoritative data and quality data, we have people working against that in real time, poisoning the data, stealing the data, you name it. The data is very vulnerable. And so data governance, data management is just as important to an effective identity solution as the product itself and how it fits into a life cycle stream of inception to deletion, lust to dust. And what are the other components that have to work in that? Is it a linear scheme? Is it a circular scheme? Is it a network scheme? How is that going to work? And how do these products the new products in IGA 2.0 fit into that model, because at one point it was the organization view. And our perspective is now changing correctly, I think, to focus on identities and the different contexts in which that identity operates. And the word personas has come back into favor or fashion as a way to model people in organizations and people outside of organizations. So we are becoming more aware of the culture, the society in which we operate. We've learned by working internationally that other countries don't do things the way we do. And the products have to adapt to that. Or those products will arise from the cultures in which they operate. And we've seen that as well. So I would say that probably the key issues that we encountered in my career were the fact that we really didn't understand the problem we were trying to solve. We didn't have enough money. We had various approaches to how to address this. We didn't have some of the things that we depended on, like quality data. We didn't know how the adjacent technologies, other applications, couldn't consume or produce data that we needed. The processes didn't even exist. And so what we really need to do is, the reference architecture is kind of a background to what I'm saying here in terms of the future, but all of the ways in which we try to structure organizations have to be questioned, because you'll see a blend of different things working together. I was very involved in the development and adoption of roles-based access control. But the reality there is that there are all kinds of things that you can look at in terms of data and process to make decisions. And that's what we were trying to do. So coming at it from any one direction always leaves something else on the table that we have to consider. So again, this is still a work in process. As we start to understand this, organizations are not static. They continue to change under us. And we need to change our focus from something static to something that changes along with the organization. And fortunately, the technologies that are coming up in adjacent areas are going to help us do that.
Yep.
So, Gary, I'll give it back to you to talk about the next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So what I'm taking from this is, a lot of the historical challenges, and to be fair, this is really complex.
Yes.
You're talking about people, processes, you're talking about, overarching governance and policy management and how businesses operate, and then trying to put identity governance and administration under it. What I take from what you're saying is that certainly the IGA offerings have been a little bit probably too static historically. So we're going to need to move to a more dynamic environment. It's the old garbage in, garbage out, right? So if the data quality isn't there, almost no matter what we're doing, it frankly doesn't matter.
And I'd like to add, and I didn't emphasize this in that discussion, but that gap between technology and the business is prevalent. It continues to be a problem.
Yep.
The business doesn't understand the complexity that you mentioned. They want things to work smoothly. They think it's simple.
Yep.
We had a part in making them think that way.
So before we move to the future part, I'd like to, Doug, you have probably done more consulting projects in this area than anyone on the planet. Somebody may argue that, but certainly up there. So you've worked with lots and lots of organizations in this area. What are some of the challenges, that you've seen with IGA over the years? And then we'll quickly transition to how we fix this, what we should be
Yeah,
doing
please
going forward.
give me a couple of minutes to chime in on that, and I don't want to reiterate or repeat what's already been said. But I think, the beauty of having this discussion now in 2025 is that we have the luxury of hindsight being 2020. We've been in this kind of a place for a few decades in terms of trying to take identity data and consume it in such a way that is meaningful from a cybersecurity standpoint and now a zero trust standpoint. And I would like to emphasize that we have often thought that the question, who has access to what, is a relatively simple question to answer, right? Simply by going to the data, figuring it out, and answering the question. We found out early on that answering that question is very difficult because the data is strewn about. And this really happened for a number of reasons. The onset of cloud computing definitely, let's say, spread identity data and access control privileges associated with it into a more, let's say, complex environment than existed in a pure Active Directory or enterprise LDAP directory environment that was initially promulgated in, say, the late 90s, early 2000s. Then we have worked in a space coupled with cloud computing in managed service providers on a global basis, performing much of the IT functions in medium and large organizations, making it exceedingly difficult to, I'm going to harken back to a report that we wrote just a couple of months ago, know your worker, KYW, because there's literally 2 or 3 or maybe even more than that kinds of dimensions in terms of people coming in, getting access, doing things with sensitive data on sensitive systems in your environment that are multiple removed from HR and having visibility into who these people are, what they should be doing. So what I'm trying to say is that what we have here, how do we get here? The first word under that, naivete, I think is really the one that is most important. And again, we need to be kind to ourselves because we didn't know what we didn't know. Answering the question, who has access to what, theoretically should be easy. We have complex environments, though, over the course of the past couple of decades that make answering that question exceedingly difficult. And so what's happened, as Kevin said and what you said, Gary, is that we've allowed ourselves to implement IGA environments in such a way that we don't even get 10% coverage of our applications. We're lucky if we get a couple percent. And the good organizations or companies that we've worked with are the ones that have a very strong risk management lens on and are making sure they focus at least the IGA functionality and capabilities on those high risk, high value, regulatory compliance, intellectual property, handling environments, applications, and data sets. And that's what we're doing. But we're left with 98% uncovered. And it's only going to get more difficult because complexity is not going away, as Kevin was alluding to. We have a lot of signals from various environments that are telling us what needs to be done. And we don't have the capacity to operate on it quickly enough. And I'm going to say this is the segue into the future until now. I think we are getting into the position now where we can keep up with and manage these complex environments. And I'm going to stop there because I think we're going to want to, as I said, segue into what's the future then? How are we going to get out of this? How are we going to make it better? I'll stop there.
Yeah, excellent. And great points. That is what we want to focus on. As Doug and Kevin said, there is an opportunity, I believe, to fix this. And, I do also believe, and we talked about this in our various meetings, discussing these topics, it's not a minor tweak. There needs to be a major refresh, and it's something we're calling IGA 2.0. And so maybe Doug and Kevin, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what the path might be forward, and then we can get a little bit more specific and ultimately leave you with some recommendations.
Would you mind if I carried it from that? Because I
Sure.
kind of end on a momentum here. Artificial intelligence, AI. Okay, everybody's going to be like, here we go again, AI. It's hype. It's not. Here's a problem. we've been talking about the complexity of the environments, the ever-growing, ever-changing complexity of the environments, not getting any better. It'd be silly for us to think that it's just going to automatically get simpler to do. AI is our friend in this particular case. I want to make two distinctions while I have the platform. Number one is artificial intelligence, agentic AI is going to be very important in most organizations. We know that. And it's also going to be exceedingly dangerous for a number of organizations if it's not governed properly. And guess what? The IGA and IAM environment is going to be front and center for governing agentic AI properly. That's going to be the subject for a different webinar. The other thing I want to talk about is how to use AI in our IGA and IAM platforms to help us manage the complexity that I don't want to say our brains are incapable of managing, but our time and our commitment from leadership, investment, job function, role, et cetera, is limited. We only have capacity to do so much, and we've run into environments that are so complex that we can only dumb it down to the 1 or 2% we can cover and forget the rest. With the advent of AI coming into things like Microsoft Entres, with Copilot, a number of other, I know Ping Identities doing a lot in this space. Most of the other vendors that we've been working with for the past couple decades are doing a lot with AI to facilitate the process of workflows, approvals, and let me add this too, discovery. One of the most difficult things to do in IGA is who has access to what with the right level of fidelity, knowing how far in to go to get the right answer. We're going to have some brain power brought into the IGA environment through the inclusion of vendors' AI implementations. We can harness that power tremendously to get us from we're stuck in the mud IGA 1.0 to now we can see what our organization is doing. We can stay ahead of the curve. It doesn't come without its own challenges, which we'll talk about when we get into the reference architecture. But I think from my perspective, that is one of the biggest things that is going to help us, or advancements that is going to help us get out of the mud from IGA. I'll stop.
Jump in, Kevin.
And I'd like to pick up there because thank you for that insight, Doug, because I'm in agreement that in a dynamic environment, we can't codify this quickly enough,
right?
Without building, processes driven this. Go back to my mention of RBAC or StarBAC. There's a lot of policies in place that have to be taken into account more than we can process. And we tried to do that in a fixed manner. And as I say, organizations change. They're very dynamic. And an AI can come up with different ways or be trained to come up with different ways to evaluate data in real time. Remember, we're not going to be able to trust anything in terms of data, but we still are going to need data governance to know what's being fed to the AI to make its decisions. We're going to need policy governance to understand what the constraints and rules are, the guardrails, if you will, and how does that feed into an IGA engine that does the heavy lifting of granting and removing access. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be much different when we talk about different identity environments, when you talk about consumer, when you talk about agent AI itself. I've talked about what we call artificial identity, as opposed to just artificial intelligence. Those agents have to be managed. They have characteristics. They have to be modeled. The whole bit, I talked a lot about in the paper about where the ITIL people failed, right? And where they need to incorporate identity into their thinking. They knew it was there, but they dodged that bullet. So it's okay. Time to stand up and do the work. That's just a suggestion, but we're going to be there anyway. And so I really want to highlight again, there's a lot of work that's going to need to be done. You can't stop doing business. You're going to need to continue with what you have because you can't step back from it and start over. But you need to start to put this on the glide path, if you will, of
Mhm.
introducing these new capabilities, modernizing the identity engine in your organization, and bringing the business to the discussion, because we've tended to give them a pass, right? And they're not part of the decisions being made. They have to be a part of this. And so that's going to make your job easier, because it's going to simplify the problems that you're trying to solve. You'll see results in revenue or whatever the business is responsible for. And you'll start to move this forward, because everybody's facing the same problem. We have generational change that we're facing. The knowledge that went into this is retiring out.
Mhm.
And we heard that in consulting engagements many times. We have Bob here, and Bob knows everything about provisioning, and Bob wants to go fishing. And we're going to give him a cell phone, literally, so he can call him up when something needs to be fixed, because it's changing. It's going to continue to change. But Bob is not going to be on the phone forever. So you need to transition this to a new generation, or to an artificial generation that can continue managing the organization's knowledge.
Mhm.
And everybody's facing this in other different areas. It's not just identity management. It's every aspect of information technology is going to be faced with this.
Yep.
So Doug, you're nodding. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. I know, I recognize several of the people that are on this webinar and worked with you through mergers and acquisitions. And I want to bring that point forward too, because it underscores the fact that we're going to have a continually dynamically changing environment that we have to deal with. We can't run away from that. And we've been struggling, as I said, with our own, capabilities in terms of time capacity to be able to deal with it. Now, Gary, if you go to the next slide, the thing I
Sure.
want to underscore about artificial intelligence, again, I mentioned hype, and we're all aware of that. Artificial intelligence is going to be brought to you by your vendor or vendors of choice. And artificial intelligence is most likely, I'm working with some of these vendors now, going to have some system prompts that allow you to sick it or send it out to discover the things that you need to discover that were so difficult to do before because of capacity issues, and get that information for you to help you tailor. But you need to be able to know what prompts you're sending out, what you're looking for, why you're looking for it, and how you're going to get what you're going to do with the information that comes back from your AI agents. I want to underscore what I've talked about, or we've talked about at TechVision, and prior to that, Gartner and Burton Group, the need for a reference architecture. Because I've said this over the years, and I'll continue to say it with my last breath. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And it would be silly for us to think that the IGA vendors are simply going to come out now with AI capabilities that solve our problems. They're going to come out with AI capabilities that give us the tools to maybe solve our problems, but we still have to do it. So the important thing I want to underscore here is that knowing where you're going is a reference architecture, right? Having that to-be state and a roadmap for how to get there is important. Gary, would you go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
What we've had over the few years here at TechVision is what we call a capabilities-based reference architecture, a capabilities matrix. This maps to the previous slide, which is a simplistic interact layer, access layer, change layer, manage layer, analytic layer, repository layer kind of a model. But you see in here all these gray boxes. And the last thing I'm going to want to do is talk about these, every one of them, or even one of them. But the important thing is these gray boxes indicate the capabilities. These are effectively the system prompts that you have to feed to AI for it to discover and it to do the things that you want it to do. I know I say discover a lot, but it's also just the workflows, the approvals, the self-learning, the things that we want it to do. You can't just send it out and say, go do it. My life's all better now. I'm going fishing. You have to have this in mind to say, these are the system prompts I need to have IGA doing for me. I'm expecting this information back. I need to know what the outliers are, the things that don't conform, et cetera. It's more important now than ever to know what your architecture looks like and what capabilities you want to implement and why. Because if you send AI out to do it for you, you're likely to have an even more complicated mess than you had before because you don't know where you're going. It's any road it's taking you. Go do it. Now I have more information, but now I'm drowning in data. It's different. So please, I'm going to underscore, and I'll stop here in a second. Reopen your reference architecture, make it IGA 2.0 compatible now, knowing that you have a lot of things to manage with MSPs, vendors, service providers, all kinds of merger acquisition capabilities, multiple clouds. This is not going to change. It's only going to be complex. Really get zero trust focused on how to use your capabilities matrix to send AI out to do on your behalf the things you need to do and not worry about the rest. I'll stop there.
So I would like to add to that. Yeah, and you mentioned one of the things that is very important in this conversation is that IGA is not disconnected from any of the things that we're trying to do here. In particular, we're moving to a zero trust world. But the premise of zero trust is that we're going to have reliable policy, we're going to have reliable data to make those decisions. That comes from your identity system. And, you know, again, I'm concerned quite a bit about reliable data in microseconds, right? How are you going to get that? We can get historical data. We don't necessarily have to trust it, but the premise of our decisions is going to be right now, what does somebody need? Because we're not going to be, we can't even predict that in this dynamic cloud-based environment. And we also have to decide from a risk-based perspective, what are the things we want to manage? We've tried to manage everything. And when we talk about the 1 to 10% that organizations have gotten so far in terms of the static environment, the only way you're going to get past that is to recognize that you're trying to pin these things down when they're just moving around you, and they will continue to. And it's very painful to recognize that, because again, premises were made that haven't panned out, and we need to recognize that and move on, both as vendors and as clients who use this technology.
Yeah, and one of the beauties of a reference architecture, and you know, to show you how far back this goes, in the late 1990s, we were at Burton Group, we were so enamored with the reference architecture, we bought a company called NetReference that did it more in the networking area. And we applied those concepts. We've used it in hundreds or thousands of consulting engagements over the years. And there's going to be a lot of complexity, right? It doesn't solve all your problems. You know, you may have, you know, shoot in the IGA space, and Kevin could probably talk for weeks about this, but in the IGA space, we have kind of classic IGA-centric companies, right? You know, this SailPoint and Savience of the world, but then, you know, Okta and Microsoft with Entra and a lot of the kind of primary IAM platforms are building kind of lightweight capabilities on top of that. A lot of our clients have a little bit of all of those, or several of them at least. And so now, so you got to define the capabilities you want and then figure out how to map that into the environments you have, and also make decisions in terms of the environments you should have. Do you have too many? Should you consolidate? And this is it's a great tool to get you there. Because a lot of the problem, a lot of the challenges we highlight, you know, it's not just IGA related, it's identity related. And as Kevin said, it's data related. And, you know, but, you know, you can't govern what you don't know about. And, you know, and that's, you know, Doug's point on the discovery side. So there's a lot of work to be done. But, you know, I think with some of the technologies, we have a path and an opportunity to do that.
I see AI being able to help us develop super super usable graph databases that show relationships among
Yep.
identity data, capabilities that need to be enabled, and all kinds of things that we couldn't do as humans with our own limited capacity. Simple as that. So I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to do with the extensive tooling redevelopment, only because, as Kevin has been saying, it will allow us to much more rapidly conform to the business requirements that are coming at us. And that is where the disconnect has been historically for the past 20 plus years. Business requirements are coming a million miles an hour. Our static environment is brittle and we cannot keep up with it. And I'm really, really adamant that that is about to change if we put our thinking caps on and we implement this right.
Exactly. So what we want to leave you with is just kind of a series of next steps, recommendations, directions to take. Of course, you know, we're happy, especially for the large end users, but even the vendors that really want to help figure out what their next generation products and services might look like. We're happy to, you know, talk with you afterwards. You know, Kevin, do you maybe want to start just kind of walking through some of these recommendations, and then Doug, you can jump in?
Sure. Let me start with the first one, because I'm the advocate for business and business governance in this conversation. We can't do it. We don't do this in the abstract. We do it to generate revenue, bottom line. And so we need to have someone engaged with this that has board level visibility, that identity is critical to their organization, and we are treating it as such. We tend to think of these things as products, or excuse me, projects. So we're going to have a single sign-on project.
Yep.
But any one of these things touches everything else. And they're all working together in tandem or disjointed manner. You have to have oversight over how all this works. And as the problem becomes larger, you're going to need to incorporate more expertise into that ecosystem. So you need to have good business governance from the outset to help you decide where your guardrails need to be in terms of what you're going to focus on, how these things are connected, and how it's going to help the organization in its short and long-term objectives. As Doug said, the reference architecture is going to help you to determine which of those components has to be there in what priority as your maturity builds to correspond to those requirements. You don't need everything on that chart, but conceptually you need the big 6 blocks that are there. You have to manage the data, you have to manage the analytics, and you manage the interfaces and so forth. All that technology and all of those processes need to work together.
Yeah.
Managing data, I'm going to reiterate that this is about the data. And you have to understand, if you have an AI or if you have an identity engine, you have to understand what you're feeding it, because it will only produce outcomes that are consistent with what went in.
Yeah.
And so the process helps to drive that. The process are the teeth on the gears, if you will, as that data is consumed. And this is going to be a moving target, because as we see today, the data we think is good is not. We literally have people poisoning data on purpose that we may rely on. And it may be too massive for us to comprehend. So this is a way to break it down into manageable parts behind the processes and behind the outcomes that we're looking for. And then when there's overlap, how do you deal with it globally? So data is a big piece of this. The relationship of AI to that is a big piece of this. All of it works together to generate the kind of output that we're looking for. risk management will help us to prioritize. We have to look at this in terms of, hey, our data's been compromised, or it's being sold somewhere. All of these things in terms of risk management help us to focus on how we protect that data as we consume it. And that will have a big influence on how we bring it in, how we operate on it, how we make decisions based on it, and then how we feed it on to others. Because as I mentioned earlier, this is a continuum. IGA is just an engine in the center, right? And there are people who feed us, or there are processes that feed us, there are processes that rely on us. And we have to be very, very reliable and very trustworthy in that, or things start to break downstream. So we have to do as much evaluation and checking as we do production. And that perspective of this is just a project isn't going to work in today's environment. You have to accept that, and the organization has to accept that this is a forefront in terms of the changing business environment and the changing consumer environment, and even where the supply comes in, right? Because now we're having to resource things based on affordability or based on where it's manufactured. This is influencing great change in terms of the people who are involved in that supply chain that we work with, and perhaps even our customers are changing because of it. So nothing that we do, the only thing, as you know, let me say this, the only thing that's constant is change, right? Nothing stays.
Yep.
Back to you, Gary.
Go ahead,
Go ahead,
Doug.
Yeah, I want to say one thing, like being bullish about artificial intelligence. I want to emphasize, I'm not saying artificial intelligence is going to be the savior, but I am saying that artificial intelligence is going to be a capacity enabler that we've been struggling with all of this time. And that goes from what Kevin was talking about, moving these things from projects to a program, an ongoing, never ending, and I mean this in a good way, program. If we're serious about zero trust, it has to be that way. But the problem we had in getting from projects to programs was largely with the enterprise capacity to do that. It costs money, it takes manpower, and that becomes a problem every budget cycle. With the onset or the inclusion of having our own artificial intelligence working on our behalf to do the things we've been trying to do in this space as IAM and IGA people or architects and enablers, we're going to be able to do that much better, more better, faster, and cheaper than we could before. I assure you that that capacity and capability is going to be there, but it's only going to be useful to you if you know what it is you want to do with it. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and one point I wanted to add on the reference architecture side, I know we've emphasized that, but to me, from an enterprise perspective, it's game changing. It allows you to kind of flip the typical cycle where your strategic vendor of choice or vendors of choice basically say, you know, here's our next 4 releases, and here's what you need to use if you want to stick with us. And to do a process of really trying to understand where you are, what your requirements are, what capabilities you need, what the priorities are for those capabilities. And we've done this and assisted several large companies to actually develop RFIs and RFPs and those things based on going through that process. So now you're in a position where you can basically say, well, here's exactly what we need. You know, your release 2.0 doesn't give that to me, but this other vendor's release 2.0 does. And to kind of look at your capabilities, your business, how you want to manage that, and kind of flip that around, so to speak. So at this point, you know, we'd love to have any questions you may have. We'd love to have any feedback, any pushback. We made some strong statements here. You know, none of us are perfect. I thought decentralized identity was going to be here in a really big way, like 10 years ago. So all of our predictions are not 100% true, although we are making progress still in that area.
Correct.
You know what? I don't know, Gary, if you have any questions.
There is a question. Kwakupoku put a question in the Q&A thing, Gary, if you want to pull that up. Can you see it?
Okay, let me, can you
I can
see
read it. I can read it.
Okay, well, let me stop the share here, but go ahead and read it, because
So the question is, how does resistance to change within the organization affect the implementation and adoption of IGA initiatives? Resistance to change. Kevin, I know you have a lot of war stories. Take that one.
Yep. Well, the thing is, at this point, this is hindsight is 2020, right? As I mentioned, the road to perfection is littered with failures, and so organizations that refuse to change won't be able to survive in the future. Between the data challenges, between the process challenges, the regulatory changes, and the workforce changes, you have to adapt your technology support to deal with that. How do you incorporate AI? How do you admit that, hey, what we have isn't perfect?
Yeah.
So how, but the thing is, one of the ways that I can sit here and say that it's really easy for me to say that, but the way I've dealt with that question is to say, look at your objectives as an organization. What do they want to do in terms of market share, in terms of revenue, in terms of mergers and acquisitions, and so forth? And how do you position that organization to accomplish that?
Yeah.
Right? How are you going to do that without a solution that knows how to blend organizations without breaking either one? And understand that identity isn't way back when. I found a company in the EU that sent their product managers back to school to look at how much identity there was in every product that went out the door. Put a number to it. And they did. And it was not small. They realized how much identity contributed to the product they were producing.
Yeah.
And it's either a good investment or a bad investment. You want to understand how to make it better and make it more efficient. So that perspective is useful. And I encourage people to look at, if you don't know what the organization is trying to do, you got some work to do.
Well, Kevin,
Go ahead,
can I chime in? Because this is an interesting conundrum, right? Because we do stress that the business requirements should be driving what we're doing. And if the business requirements are, we don't want to change, those are the business requirements. I'm sorry. Okay. And that's the interesting thing. We can't say, well, you have to change, you're going to die. Here's why I think where we are in the outset of 2.0 is going to be very, very good for us. Most of you on this call have probably heard many of the vendors. I know there's a number of them that talk about identity fabric, right? Which is what we've been stressing at TechVision Research, Gartner, and even Burton Group. Things like virtualization of identity data across multiple repositories that you can rationalize during runtime to make decisions. Identity fabric is really important. And we're only now in 2025 really coming to the, let's say, common understanding that that is necessary to be able to support the business needs without making IAM, IGA drive the business. Because that is, we all agree that we can't do that. It doesn't work. So I think the important thing to say is that resistance to change in an organization is the culture of the organization. And in many cases, we just have to accept that. we are bullish about the 2.0 and where we are today is that for the first time ever, we're going to have the processing capacity, the mental capacity with assistance from artificial intelligence, the network infrastructure capacity with just the advancement we have in technology to be able to deal with changing things without changing the interface. Remember, user experience, all that. When organizations don't want to change, it's largely because we're set in how we do things, and telling people to do things differently is a non-starter. Great. That's always the user experience conundrum that we deal with. But we have more power coming at our fingertips right now as we speak to be able to do the things we need to do without upsetting or changing radically what the organization does, and in effect, making the business change to what we want. And we can't do that.
Yeah, and I would add to that, that it's not up to us to tell the business what change is coming.
Yeah.
But in a proper governance state in an organization, there is going to be a desire for something, and you have to meet those needs.
Yep.
And if you have to do it without affecting the UI or and so forth, so be it. Underneath
Yep.
all that, it's like the ducks swimming, right? You know,
Yep.
they look real good at the top, but those feet are moving like crazy. And
Absolutely.
you
Nothing wrong with that.
orchestrate that, right? So you're not getting any more money to do it. The influences on those things are changing. You may have to insulate the organization from the changes that they are experiencing.
Yes.
So I think Doug and I are actually talking in concert.
Yep.
But in reality, there's going to be change whether you like it or not. It's just, you may say resistance, but you don't get any other.
I think there are a number of ways that changes could happen, right? So, the way generative AI works and natural language processing. So instead of going to a screen to do something in IGA, you say, I need to give Doug access to this for the next 20 minutes. Go do it. And it goes off and does it, right? So that's not really change in what you're doing in the infrastructure, but it's changing how people interact with it. That could be actually very beneficial. And I want to thank everybody on the panel for the work that they've done, not only to prepare for this, but the years of experience that they have to share with everybody. So